been using the Fujifilm XF 50mm 1.0 for a little while now, and I think it's time to put a few thoughts together. In fact, I've shot this intro with it at f1.0, which is why it's a little bit rough and ready. It's a tad awkward shooting video at f1.0. The lens really for me is going to be all about portraits more than anything, but I think due to the lack of focus breathing, for example, it can be very handy for those cine shooters too. But, you know, it's big, heavy and expensive, so it's not for everyone. But we're going to look at it up close, throw up a lot of random unedited JPEGs, portraits, you know, stuff like that, and then see how we get on and have a chat about it afterwards. So let's crack on. $845 comes with this nice solid hood, nice snap cap, the usual rear cap, and nice mount at the back. Weather sealing ring around there feels very nice. Let's pop that back on. There we go. Very chunky beast, which is for some of us a bit of a problem, but there we go. We are getting a focal length in full frame terms of 75mm. Very nice for portraiture, of course. So that's an angle of view of 31.7 degrees. The aperture f1.0, of course, the headline round to 16, and typical for this level of X-mount lens, we've got the A at that end. The aperture ring, nice clicks, very decent, very typical. The build quality feels as you'd expect from a Fujifilm lens. The manual focus ring, nice and smooth. Not sure that's something I really care about with this particular lens, but that's okay. And as you can see, it's infinite. We're getting a minimum object distance of 70 centimeters, and the retail on it, of course, basically as much or more than the T4 that I'm using with this lens that I'm actually shooting with right now. But all the samples with the T4, straight out of camera, unedited JPEGs, you know how it is. When I first saw this lens as a prototype back in February 2020, directly before we went into the first lockdown, I wasn't all that excited. I thought it was probably some kind of showcase lens that wouldn't be particularly practical for most working photographers. I'm into small gear whenever possible, but to get to f1.0, naturally the engineers had to go large. Of course, this was originally going to be a 33mm f1.0, and it was the excessive size and weight that made them switch to a 50mm. Now, I think the lens balances quite well in the T4, especially a gripped one, as my other one is, and I found it was easy to handle, especially on the slower shoots that, you know, I've put up on here. The kind of portrait shoots that I'm really into, if I'm honest. Now, I'm not sure I want to be lugging a thing this size and weight around on a long wedding day anymore, so, you know, that's a personal thing. You might be okay with that though, so that's fair. And I think the lens would work very well on a shoot like that, unless you want to use AFC a lot, but then that's a different story. That's something you might want to test out for yourself. The aperture ring works as well as the other XF lenses in the lineup. There's nothing really to say other than the aperture ring clicks nicely through the range, and the manual focus ring is smooth and easy to use in real world use. Face and eye detection is a little bit unsure, especially with a subject with glasses. Now I found it struggled a bit overall, but that could probably be tightened up in a firmware update. I don't think it's particularly designed for fast-paced shooting, so it's cool as it is. Imagine shifting around all that heavy glass, something's got to give, you know. So in this case, the speed and the accuracy maybe, yeah, but it didn't ruin anything for me. Obviously at f1, you really have to be on the ball, literally the nearest eyeball in most of the cases I used this lens in. Initial impressions were that the images were sharp wide open, especially in the center, and as I've used it quite a bit now, I can say the edges, yeah, to be fair, not so great until you get to around f4, f5.6. But let's just say, on a bit of a side note, a sidebar, a portrait lens doesn't need to be clinically sharp. It's just not flattering, you know, when it's one of those deadly sharp pixel peeper sort of lenses. But naturally at this price point you'd expect top-notch IQ. It's all about the bokeh, and if there's a lens in the XF lineup that is the creamy bokeh monster, this is it. It'll turn the dullest backgrounds, as you've seen in a lot of these samples, into a nice soft sort of texture. It lets the subject pop out beautifully against that colour, even if it's something dull and generally fairly grim. Now I did notice some chromatic aberration in certain scenes, but generally it's very well controlled. Maybe a little bit low on contrast, wide open, but you know, it's a sweet lens. It also handled stuff like flaring very well. Now I'd have preferred a closer minimum focus distance to make this a bit more general use, but I can live with it as it is. This for me is a dedicated portraiture lens. Your experience might vary, of course. At around £1,500, it's not for everybody. Yes, it is well built. It's a little bit slower when it comes to the autofocus than some lenses, but for maximum aperture fun, it's the only real choice. Literally, to get f1 with autofocus and weather resistance, it's the only choice. Now, I'm not into comparing lenses of different focal lengths, but the next lens in the lineup that can do a very similar job is, of course, the 56mm f1.2, one of the best lenses out there for Fujifilm, arguably. Now, that could be a better choice for you, to be fair, but this is arguably the bokeh king in the XF lineup, and for all-weather portraits, this is gotta be your #1 choice. And not to mention that it's 4 times the weight and nearly 4 times the price of the lovely little 50mm f2, but it's not here to compete with that either. Now I shot a bunch of random video clips with it that I didn't include, and I'd say in the right hands this could be a very handy little, let's say, cine lens, albeit the clicked aperturing will limit it for video shooting, but personally I prefer it as it is for stills, definitely 100%. Now in video shooting you're probably going to need to get a decent set of ND filters to make it extra useful. In stills mode, not a problem. The brilliant electronic shutter of the Fujifilm X-T4 that I'm shooting with really makes the difference. All in all, it's a very, very nice lens that, while not perfect, may well be the best choice for an all-weather portrait professional. But have you tried this lens? Let us know in the comments below. Take it easy, and I'll see you next week.